What if the innovation barrier becomes so thin that you can basically do it yourself? And if you can do that, you can have many, many more failures. And this is something that's really important. We need failures. Failures are awesome. Failures tell us what paths not to trod. And then for the ones that are left, it tells you who the winners are. So more cheap failure everywhere with more innovation on top of that, that's an ecosystem that's going to deliver.
That's Brown University professor Mark Blyth. Mark was a guest on Rapid Response a few months ago, and his episode was so engaging and instructive and so cheered by our listeners that we're bringing him back, this time recorded live on stage at the Brown Innovation Showcase in Providence, Rhode Island. Last time around, Mark talked about what he called the economic Halloween of 2025. This time, he talks about tech bubbles versus banking bubbles, how we're misunderstanding AI's impact on the job market, and the changing shape of the U.S. innovation ecosystem. From Whole Foods to Instagram to Russian oil, Mark punctures knee-jerk assumptions. So let's get to it. I'm Bob Safian, and this is Rapid Response. This is Professor Mark Blyth, political economist here at Brown University. He was a guest on my podcast on Rapid Response over the summer. At that time, I said, you made this economic situation sound both scary and fun, which you called living through an economic Halloween. I asked you at that time about the stock market being at an all-time high at the same time that we had sort of historic, or certainly in recent decades, historic tariffs and trade wars. Now it's a few months later, and the stock market is even higher. What is going on? Does this make sense?
And there's still no sign of inflation from tariffs. And I just wrote a book about inflation. So, here's one way to think about it, and AI enters the conversation. A whole bunch of supply chain management firms were caught very short when COVID happened. And suddenly we didn't have stuff. And that's why prices went up. We blamed the Biden stimulus checks, but it was really just there was no stuff and the price of stuff went up. And those supply chain firms immediately started to talk this good game of resilience and redundancy and all these good sounding words that you'd want to hear, they make you feel good, but they don't actually mean anything. Then AI happened and they started to actually put it into their processes. And one of the ways that tariff inflation is not showing up is these guys have become unbelievably good at making their sources flexible and also dynamic change inside. So basically, your stuff's on a ship and it's coming from over the Pacific, and you know there's going to be a bottleneck because something's coming up or a tariff has been changed. They will basically reroute the next cargo to accommodate and then take that one. So basically, it's like the delivery vans for Amazon. When they forget to take it off the truck, they don't drive the truck back. They just do a new one and then send that truck somewhere else. And that's what AI real-time optimization can do. So you're beginning to see this in all these different areas, and it's already having an effect.
There's not going to be any inflation from tariffs.
Well, there might be some eventually, because eventually it has to be paid by someone. But when you consider that corporate profits in the United States are 12.5% of GDP, they got a lot of margin room before they have to start passing it on to anyone else. So this is not going to show up for a while.
But if they're giving up margin, then why is the stock price going up?
Because it's not about discounted cash flow when it's really 40% of the market is driven by 6 companies, all of whom are using hyperscaling to get to the goal of AI, which is generalized artificial intelligence. Now, whether that's going to work or not, spoiler alert, scaling's not going to get you there. But whether that works or not, you've got an unbelievable amount of capital expenditure into an incredibly exciting area. So I think of this almost as analogous to the 2000 dot-com bust. Remember the time, huge valuations, stock market, then it popped. Didn't really do that much damage at all to the real economy. The insiders took a bath. The great thing about tech busts as opposed to banking busts leave behind debt and everyone gets hurt. Tech busts leave behind stuff. And other entrepreneurs come along, dig through the rubble and go, oh, this bit's really good. Let's put this together with this. So this is why we didn't have Netflix in 2000. Didn't have the tech, had the cables. When Global Crossing, the cable firm, went bankrupt, all you need to do was wait 2 more generations of chip evolution and you could finally build Netflix. And that's why we have streaming. So that's the way this is going to evolve.
As long as the financial system doesn't back too much of the investment that's being put into the AI, right? Because it could circle around.
Exactly, but this is precisely why it's interesting. These companies, and this is how the ecosystem has changed in such a short period of time, they are so rich, they are literally doing this from retained earnings. Right, not very little of this is done actually in capital raising. They are so incredibly rich already. So when Microsoft or, for example, Meta are able to just hire people for salary numbers that are truly eye-popping, this is an accounting error on their balance sheet.
Because they just have so much money.
Because they have so much cash. I mean, think about Apple, right? Apple at any given point in time sits on $250 billion of cash. That's so much free cash that they can launch an Apple Card, which is basically a bank run from your phone, which uses their cash so they don't have to borrow anyone else's, which is why they can give you a better savings rate and still make money. Like, wow.
I mean, as you say that, these changes sound good.
Yeah, but also kind of Halloween, because you're like, oh my God, what's coming next?
So when we talked before, you also talked about like the U.S. economy kind of struggling to deal with the consequences of 30 years of choices that kind of undermined other parts of the economy, manufacturing and opportunity. And this is sort of where the economics and the politics kind of intersect.
Yeah. So if you are going to reindustrialize the United States, which is an ambition of at least some people in the administration, the chances are you're going to do it with automation. You're not really going to rebuild the 1950s. It's a bit of a fantasy. And if you do that, then, capital replaces labor at the margin very efficiently, particularly in manufacturing. So what are you going to end up with? You're going to end up with dark factories filled with robots. You're not going to have a manufacturing renaissance. But there's another way of thinking about this. Every time that you have a major technological change, there's the books that come out that say all the jobs are going to go, everything's going to be lost, so on and so forth. In 2010, there was a book called Race Against the Machine. It's when someone at Harvard Business School discovered what we called before AI big data, right? And big data meets machine learning. And they predicted that 60% of all jobs would be automated by 2020. This is a huge splash. It's all over the financial press. Everyone's terrified. And then Oxford Business School, 2015, it's only 40%. Then the OECD in 2018 talk about calling a 100-meter race 80 meters down the track, said it'll only be 20%. We got to 2020, it was 0%. The technology was absorbed into labor markets and expanded them. That's always what happens, right? So don't fear AI on that basis. The manufacturing sector may shrink, but that's not where we need to grow. We need to grow in healthcare. We need to grow in the care economy. And if you can adopt technologically smart solutions in those areas, everybody wins.
So that all the talk about AI potentially losing all these jobs, you don't buy it, that it's not going to be that bad, or can we say that because we're part of the group that maybe will be okay?
Well, yes to that, but also this is deep revenge for everyone who sent their kids to coding camp 12 years ago. Because rather than learning social skills and how to play soccer, you taught them something that AI is actually going to replace. Now, here's an interesting one. If you look on the Bureau of Labor Statistics website, it'll give you a little chart that says the fastest growing jobs in America. And for the past year, maybe 2 years, it's been basically digital and engineering, AI, et cetera, et cetera. 200% growth from a baseline of 50,000, which is 200,000, 250,000 in a labor market of 133 million people.
It's nothing.
So what's the fastest growing job by volume in the United States for the past 15 years that dwarfs this by a factor of 20? Elder care nurse. Right. We're all getting older. We all get chronic diseases. That's where the research is going to go. That's where the dollar's going to go. That's where these technologies are going to make a huge impact, whether it's in drug design, whether it's in bioimmune therapies, whether it's in apps that people can use to improve their quality of life. That's basically where to look. So yes, will there be creative destruction on the front end? Absolutely. If it can code itself, why does it need you? But on the other end, we get to use it. That's the fun bit.
You mentioned your book a few minutes ago, Inflation, A Guide for Winners and Losers. It seems like inflation, it's like this political boogeyman. It sort of comes up, but the official stats make it seem like no big deal, or it's not. Like, what are we missing in all that?
So the subtitle of the book is Users and Losers, because the book was motivated by the following. The idea that we all suffer from inflation is nonsense. I'll give you an example. How many of you shop at Whole Foods? You are impervious to inflation. because you have been paying that much for your tomatoes for the past 10 years when you could have got them half the price down the road, right? What that means is if your income is pretty high and you have a vanishingly small part of that goes to consumption goods, which is what the price index actually measures, then if they go up, if eggs go up by 10%, you notice it. If it's $11 for eggs, you notice it, but it's not a difference to your life. You're in the bottom 20% or 40%. You're a single mom, you're working 2 jobs, and egg prices go up and inflation goes up by 5%. This is like serious life choices you have to make for you and your family. And that distributional thing really gets kind of ignored in most of our discussions because we're all meant to suffer from it. In fact, some of us make out like bandits because of it. If you've got a fixed rate mortgage and inflation goes up, if you've already paid off your house and inflation goes up, if you live on the east side of Providence, we're all aware of the fact that all our houses went up $200,000 in the past 3 years. How did that happen? Because everyone wants a house, they're not building them, and it's an inflation hedge. So it's really about unlocking that and looking into this fact that we don't all suffer from this. And the story that it's always just government spending, it's a good story. But it's what happened in Europe was very simple. They had a gas station called Russia, and they blew up the pipes. They had no gas, and it took them a year to find Qatar on the map. That explains it. No need to go anywhere else.
You told me when we talked before, the 50-year relationship between government funding, university research, and private sector innovation is going to change. What is that change going to look like? What does an innovation ecosystem look like in a time like this, in this environment?
So it's been changing for a while. We just haven't had cause to put the pieces together. So the original innovation ecosystem arose in the 1980s, basically with firms like Warburg Pincus investing in that period into what became the VC industry. In the California VC industry, which was slightly different. And the basic idea was, as it had been for a while, that the federal government gives money to universities. Universities do basic research. Some bit of this becomes commercializable. Then the VCs take it to other people. They commercialize it. You get the IPO, and then you continue on, right? It was a victim of its own success because what begins to happen? Some of these firms do extraordinarily well. Some of these firms become absolutely enormous. And when they do, they make their profits because they're effectively monopolies in their sectors, whether through digital platforms or whatever. And what that means is the next crowd coming up through the ecosystem, their ambition isn't to become a company, it's to get bought by those guys, to get taken off the market for a hefty price. Think Instagram is one of those examples. Now, when that changes, and a third change comes along and compounds this, which is the relationship of the universities to the federal government, when they see those firms spending one firm more than Harvard does on all of its research across all those different areas in a super concentrated bid for AI, then they take notice and they begin to think, hey, why are we paying you 60% overhead again? Do we really need you to do research on this topic? Look at what those guys are doing over there. Now, at the end of the day, it's simple. Google's never going to do basic materials research, right? Meta's never going to do chemistry. And unless you want to opt out of science completely, you're going to have to keep doing that. But the relationship is changing. It's not just the current federal government. It's been a long time in the making, and it's because of the success of the ecosystem itself. And
in this environment, then, if you're not going to get a ton of money from Meta or Google, and you're not going to get a ton of money from the government, what is an ecosystem, not just at Brown, but say in Providence, in Rhode Island? What does that need?
So the VC networks are still there. The micro investors are still there. In fact, their problem is the same as yours. They've been squeezed out of opportunities as well. So to me, it's a kind of coordination and information problem. You have the ideas, you have the entrepreneurs, you still have the funders that are outside of these behemoth companies, and for somehow they're not being connected correctly. So if there is a purpose to, what we're doing here, it's precisely that. It's precisely trying to create the new networks of plumbing for finance that's going to create the micro enterprises that are going to come up in a slightly different way because that ecosystem has changed. But the money's still there on the left-hand side. The innovation's still there on the right-hand side. We just need to connect it.
And I guess AI will make the jump from being a smaller enterprise to a more scaled enterprise maybe less expensive and faster, so that the innovation ecosystem can move at a higher pace.
Follow that thought even further. What happens if you can actually disintermediate the funders? What if the innovation barrier becomes so thin that you can basically do it yourself? And if you can do that, you can have many, many more failures. And this is something that's really important. We need failures. Failures are awesome. Failures tell us what paths not to trod. And then for the ones that are left, it tells you who the winners are. So more cheap failure everywhere with more innovation on top of that, that's an ecosystem that's going to deliver.
Well, Mark, this was great. As always, thank you.
Thank you.
You gotta love failure, right? Except when it's happening to you. What Mark means, of course, is that rapid failure is an essential tool on a systemic level. The faster we fail, the less we waste on each go-round, and the more learning we accrue. I've always felt like failure is the wrong word. It's too broad a word. We do our best learning the hard way. One other observation about Mark, his ability to keep things entertaining even when the context is difficult is a model for inspiring teams in ambiguous times. Mark calls things as he sees them, doesn't sugarcoat the facts, but also doesn't let the disappointments, the failures, slow his role. We need an open mind to glean the right lessons from our challenges, and keeping a smile on your face, whatever the headwinds, only helps. I'm Bob Safian. Thanks for listening.